This is a work of fiction. Unless otherwise indicated, all the names, characters, businesses, places, events and incidents in this book are either the product of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Part 1: The Forging of an Empire. Florence's story begins not as a nation, but as a continental colossus. An empire forged not just by martial might but by an insatiable ambition to reshape the world. Its origins were humble, a single city-state whose disciplined legions began a relentless expansion. Their march carved out a domain across most of Viridia and established crucial outposts in Zerida, not for mere conquest, but for the grand purpose of bringing civilization to the world. They were an army of engineers as much as soldiers. Where the legions conquered, the builders followed, and the landscape was forever changed by their monumental works. The empire's defining legacy was its engineering. A vast, interconnected web of paved roads, straight as an arrow, ran from the sun-drenched colonial outposts to the cold, northern frontier. These arteries of commerce and communication were so well built that they would endure for millennia, silent testaments to an unrivaled age of craftsmanship. Life-giving aqueducts, their graceful arches spanning valleys and rivers, carried water to burgeoning cities, feeding sprawling public baths, grand amphitheaters, and lush gardens. The capital was a marvel of marble and stone, a heart of commerce and culture where knowledge flourished and the arts reached their zenith. This was the Golden Age, a time of prosperity and unshakable confidence, where the name Florence was synonymous with power and progress. The empire's strength was its greatest virtue and, ultimately, its most profound flaw. It grew too confident in its own supremacy. Part 2: The Eternal Frontier. For thousands of years, the northern border of the Florentine Empire served as a perpetual proving ground. Here, beyond the last paved road and the final stone garrison, stretched the untamed, frigid lands of the north, a desolate and rugged terrain of dark forests and icy mountains. This was the home of a multitude of barbarian tribes, a fragmented collection of clans and peoples who refused to bend the knee. The relentless skirmishes along this frontier were a constant state of affairs. The disciplined Florentine legions, clad in polished steel and armed with unmatched tactics, easily repelled the raiders. They built fortified watchtowers, garrisoned legions in cold, isolated forts, and saw every ambush and every attack as a minor annoyance, a perpetual test of their vigilance. The Florentine leadership, far removed in their opulent capital, viewed these barbarians with a dismissive arrogance born from centuries of unchallenged dominance. They saw the tribes not as a cohesive threat, but as a persistent, manageable nuisance, savage and disorganized. They were a predictable opponent that kept the legions sharp. The empire's wealth and power were so immense that they could afford this endless, low-level conflict. What they failed to see, however, was that in the crucible of these endless skirmishes, the disparate tribes were learning and evolving. They were absorbing Florentine tactics, observing their weaknesses, and slowly, stealthily, unifying under a new, powerful leader. While Florence was distracted by its own internal glory, the true threat was coalescing in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at a moment of imperial weakness. The empire's greatest miscalculation was believing its power was so great that it could never truly fall. The Second Era, the Time of Division. Part 1: The Fracturing of a Legacy. After millennia of absolute power, the golden age of the Florentine Empire did not fall to an external foe, but was consumed by its own hubris. The seeds of its destruction were sown in the capital itself, as a crisis of succession plunged the mighty empire into a devastating civil war. Grand legions, once symbols of unity, were suborned by ambitious generals and powerful governors, each declaring themselves the one true emperor. The empire, that vast tapestry of conquered lands, unraveled into 6 warring domains. This was not a clash of ideologies but a ruthless, blood-soaked struggle for power, with former brothers in arms now fighting to the death in the fields where they once trained together. The fighting was a level of brutality the empire had never known. Magnificent marble cities, once the jewels of the empire, endured devastating sieges. The meticulously paved roads that had once carried trade and prosperity were now choked with refugees and the marching feet of warring armies. The Civil War was not just a military conflict, it was a societal collapse. The grand aqueducts were sabotaged, fields were burned to starve out rival factions, and the bonds of family and community were shattered by shifting allegiances. Amidst this internal carnage, the northern frontier, once eternally guarded by an impenetrable line of legions, was all but abandoned. The fierce barbarian tribes, long considered a mere nuisance, watched from their frozen vantage points, observing the empire's self-inflicted wounds, learning its tactics, and for the first time in their history, uniting for a singular, vengeful purpose. Part 2, From Ashes to Kingdoms. The Civil War's bitter end came not with a final victory, but with a swift and total annihilation. The unified barbarian horde, a tidal wave of fury and steel, swept down from the north, and the fractured Florentine armies, exhausted and disorganized by years of infighting, were utterly helpless before them. The 6 warring factions were not defeated, they were simply erased. From the smoldering ashes of the empire, the survivors began the painful process of rebuilding. But what rose from the ruins was not a single power. The different regions of Florence emerged as a collection of independent kingdoms, duchies, and petty principalities, each vying for what remained of the former empire's influence. This era, a feudal age for Florence, was defined by localized, smaller-scale conflicts between these newly formed states. Fortified castles dotted the landscape, and alliances shifted with the winds of war. While Florence was busy learning the hard lessons of its own disunity, the other nations of Viridia, Frankfurt, Bavaria, and Iberia were able to grow in strength and solidify their own identities, free from the shadow of Florentine rule. The proud citizens of the empire were now scattered, their history relegated to dusty scrolls. This period of fragmentation, however, ultimately served as a crucible. The memory of the barbarian invasion and the shared pain of civil war forged a new collective identity, a burning desire to reunite and reclaim their place in the world. Slowly but surely, the scattered kingdoms began to forge a single nation once more, determined to never again fall to the weakness that comes from a house divided. The Third Era, the Modern Age and a New Shadow. Part 1, The Scars of War. The long-awaited reunification of Florence came not with a flourish of trumpets, but with a weary sigh. Still fragile and rebuilding, the newly unified nation was plunged into a grueling war with its powerful neighbor, Frankfurt. Fought over key trade routes and colonial territories in Zerida, this was a conflict of cold, industrial-age efficiency, defined by endless stalemates and slaughter on a scale the ancient Florentine legions could never have imagined. The war was not only costly in resources, but it inflicted a profound psychological wound on the nation. A generation of veterans, once told they were fighting to restore their country's greatness, returned home broken and disillusioned. They found a weak economy, a government struggling with crippling debt, and a society that had lost its moral compass. In the aftermath, a creeping sense of national purposelessness took hold, a fertile ground for a new kind of power to rise. Part 2: The Unseen Government. As the state faltered, a deep and sinister power vacuum opened up beneath the surface of Florentine society. Into this void stepped a powerful criminal underworld, a network of interlocking syndicates and families that quickly grew to control every aspect of daily life. These shadowy figures, operating from the hidden corners of the city, became a clandestine mirror of the government itself. They had their own laws, their own sense of justice, and their own ruthless methods of enforcement. The Florentine authorities were too weak and too corrupt to stop them, and the populace, starved for order, often turned to these crime lords for security and arbitration. From extortion rings to illegal gambling dens and control of the nation's ports and trade, the underworld's power flourished, becoming a silent, and in some ways, more effective government than the one officially in charge. Part 3: The Foreign Ideology. The fragile, corrupted peace was shattered in 1894 when a devastating continent-wide war erupted between Frankfurt and its eastern rival, Bavaria. This brutal conflict, fought with relentless, mechanized force, reshaped the map and brought an end to the old order of kings and empires. By its conclusion in 1901, a new and terrifying force had spread across the continent like a plague: the Bavarian fascist ideology. This philosophy, which preached absolute state authority, a complete rejection of individual weakness, and racial purity, found a powerful resonance in Florence. It offered a compelling narrative of strength, discipline, and order to a population tired of the rampant corruption and the shame of their weakness. To the veterans who had lost everything, the promise of a return to greatness, of a society forged by the iron will of the state, was too tempting to resist. Part 4: The Coup and the Exiles. The stage was set for the final act. In 1919, the Florentine Fascist Party, a political force forged in the crucible of this foreign ideology, seized power in a swift and ruthless coup. It was not a political election, but a decisive act with boots on the ground and a show of force. Their first and most popular act came in 1920, when they launched a brutal and unforgiving campaign to eradicate the organized crime networks. Raids were carried out on a massive scale, leaders were arrested or publicly executed, and the syndicate's vast operations were systematically dismantled. The campaign was a masterclass in swift, authoritarian efficiency. However, the criminals were not annihilated, they were simply pushed out. These powerful crime families, a hardened network of survivors, relocated to new territories, primarily on the continent of North Etherian, where they continue to operate and build their own empires to this day, an enduring shadow of Florence's past. 100% world built and written by Joshua A. Cinquemani and read to you by AI. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to support the channel.